Hi, my name's Starsky and welcome to From the Studio on Clubbing TV, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the sort of kit you'd use back in the early days of dance music in sort of late 80s, early 90s. So today we're going back to the old school. One of my more recent episodes, I created a track using just this and a couple of these, and it sounded like a pretty decent sort of minimalish sort of techno track. You know, not much kit used there. You could obviously do that on something like a really old laptop. This is probably about 5 years old. It's a bit knackered, but actually it works okay for doing sort of really standard dance tracks. Or you could use something like this these days, an iPad that somebody's sat on. That still works, believe it or not. But yeah, you can write a whole track on that, and you can even go as far as using your phone. So it seems that size doesn't matter after all, because if you look back at what we used to use in the sort of 90s, the size of the equipment and the weight of the equipment was insane. I've just found a few bits of that I've got sort of in storage, and I brought them out to sort of display today, and the weight of them's phenomenal. So let's have a look at the kit we'll need to set up our Old Skool Raver's studio. The first bit of kit you'd need in your sort of 90s or 80s studio would be a desktop computer. Everybody used the Atari ST in the day because it had a built-in Midi interface, a Midi in and a Midi out, but we haven't got one of them, so I'll just put this on the desk for now. And obviously you had a proper big juicy old sort of heavy monitor that went with that as well. Then you'd need a tape player, and you can see in the back there I've got the Fostex R8. So there was no such thing as a DAW. There was nothing you could record something like vocals on other than tape. There was no digital formats at the time, so the very sort of minimal you could have is this small little tape machine, and it does actually weigh a ton. It doesn't work at the minute. Sort of, God knows how many cogs and bits and bobs are inside this, but it's sort of last seen its working days, probably about 20 years ago or something like that. But it's an 8-track machine, but you could only ever put 7 tracks on it because the 8th track was used for your Midi time code. And what's Midi time code? Well, Midi time code is essentially just numbers recorded onto the tape. So when you played the tape, you could sync it up to your computer, and the computer knew exactly where to play on the track. And to do that, you needed a time code generator and a time code reader. So I've got one of these that I've found as well. Let's just plug this in to see if we can see what the time code looks like. There we go. No, we don't. A few random pushes of buttons later, with a stripe time code out. Let's press play, is it? Oh, I can't remember, it's so long ago since I used this. There we go. So we can see down here that what we've got there is essentially what you sort of get on the bottom of a sort of video frame, isn't it? You've got your frames here, and you've got your seconds, minutes, hours, and this just emits basically, when you're recording it to the tape, it emits just, it sounds like an old modem or something, and that time code you play back, and it's literally just an audio signal, and the audio signal is all those sort of weird, as I say, those modem old sort of 1980s computer sounds, and they come back into this. It converts the sounds into Midi time code and then sends the time code to the computer. So the basis of this whole system is that your tape player tells your computer where it's playing on the tape so that you can sync everything together. So really quite complex and really quite expensive just to get things synced up so you can record your vocals. And of course, in order to interface this with your computer, you would need a Midi interface. And here we have one here. This is in the days before USB. So there's this serial port, and you've got 8 different Midi ins, you've got 8 different Midi outs, so you end up with 128 Midi channels on that. So that could be 128 separate lines or 128 separate synthesizers. So the studio's starting to fill up quite nicely now. And then once you're happy with your track and you record it to stereo, the thing we used was a DAT player, it's called. God, this weighs a ton as well, looks like an old sort of video player. And these were the sort of the first digital recording systems, so filling up compared to a phone, and we've not even got the synthesizers out yet. Now let's see if I can get this to work. Let's see if I can turn it on. Yeah, there we go, it's working. It just brings back so many memories, this interface and the look of this screen. Is it working? It's not playing anything anyway. Here we go. And there you have your DAT tape. This was the standard music industry format. Everyone had them. I've got boxes full of these, full of finished recordings in the loft somewhere. Let's see if I can play it. Doesn't look like this is going to work. It's a bit of a shame. Could have tried playing a load of my old tracks. So we're almost there now, setting up the studio, but there's one major thing missing, which every studio absolutely had to have, and that's a mixing desk. And here we've got a very modern, this is a sort of analog digital hybrid by Korg called the SoundLink, but it was designed by the guy that helped design the Mackie desks, or designed the Mackie desks. And the Mackie desks, the Mackie 32x8 and the 24x8, they were the ones that everybody used back in the day. I had a 56 channel one. They had this really nice sort of distortion on the preamps. If you just sort of abuse them a little bit, you got this really nice effect until you realise that you're only ever using 2 channels once you had a DAW. So let's put this there as well. And I think this sort of sets up the early 90s studio. And I've got to say, just playing with this, it's really nice to have access to all the EQ controls and all the auxiliary channels and the volume and the gain for every channel directly in front of you. You sort of miss that, and I can sort of understand why people buy control surfaces, because there's something really nice and tangible about a big mixing desk, but they do take up a bit of space. So now it's time to look at what you'd use to make some sounds. The first synth I'm going to pull out as if by magic is the Juno 106, and you weren't really allowed in a studio if you didn't have a 106. You weren't allowed to make dance music because pretty much every single track had one on. Here we go. This is absolutely superb, and it was on pretty much, as I say, every dance track you'd ever heard. It does lovely pads and really nice bass lines and sort of squelchy sounds. So let's put that somewhere. Running out of space. Well, I have run out of space. Let's put it over here. And the one thing I would say about the 106 is that it's still used, it's still in the studio, it's still wired up, it's still midied up, it's plumbed in direct to my desk. So unlike the rest of these things, it's still in use. So let's take a look at another one. And here we have my trusty old Alpha Juno 2. It's the first sort of grown-up synthesizer I ever bought, because people were getting rid of them cheap because they got this stupid interface with an alpha dial, and you sort of look for the parameter that you want to change, and you change it on this, rather than just having lots and lots of knobs like you've got here, and you can just instant access to everything. This is an absolute nightmare to program, and for a first synthesizer it was an absolutely ridiculously stupid thing for me to buy, but it was really big, making what's called the Hoover sound. You'll have heard it on loads of stuff, based on a preset on this called What The. So it's a really famous, if difficult to play, techno synth. I'm quite impressed with myself. I'm fitting it all on the table, to be honest. And the next one, which is the really, really famous one, is the acid synth, and that's the 303. I don't have a 303. They're one of the most annoying things anyone ever had, because they didn't have MIDI in and out, so you had to use the CV gates. And you know, as soon as other synths came along that could do similar sort of noises, everyone got rid of these. So this is the Behringer TD-3, but it's another classic, I suppose. Well, this isn't, but the original's a classic. For pure acid house, this is the acid machine. And then, of course, you've got to have a sampler. The sampler was sort of like the beating, creative heart of the studio. I mean, this is functional. All this stuff over here is functional. You know, your synths make your synth lines, etc. But for the real creative, mad stuff that was happening, you had to have an Akai sampler. And here we have the Akai S3000i, complete with 8 meg, yes, 8 whole meg of memory. Not 8 gig, 8 meg. The one I had before this was an Akai S950, and that had 512 kilobytes. Insane. You could get like one drum and one snare on it. But these were the absolute, as I say, the absolute beating heart of creativity. Before you could record anything digitally in your DAW, this was the thing to have. So I'm having quite the workout today, shifting all this around. Let's see if we can get the sampler up and running, shall we? This will be really interesting. It's not been turned on for 15, maybe 20 years, or God knows how long. So the lights come on, it's doing something. The discs whirring around. What have I got? This has been in the attic for as I say, for 15 years. What was the last thing I loaded on it? So an open hat and a road sample. So we're almost there now with our early Ravers studio. So I want to plumb it all in now and start playing with it. Might do that in another episode. One last thing though, you've got to have some reverb, you've got to have some sort of effects units, and everybody had this. It's the Alesis Midi verb. It's sort of really rough sounding, but it is on everything, and every single studio had an Alesis Midi verb or two. I've got, this is a 3, there's the 4, I think I had the 2 as well, I think I had 2 2s. So yeah, here we go, I'm hiding behind a wall of a tower of power. I'm feeling a bit nostalgic now, which is quite bizarre. It's only sort of stuff that's been in the loft, especially all this stuff here. But it does remind me of having this big tower of stuff and all these different things, all the flashing lights, all these different compressors, all the stuff you just don't need anymore. You can do a whole album on a single laptop now, can't you? I mean, what are my thoughts on this in the end? Well, I think progress is a wonderful thing. You can do on this what this whole studio could do. I think it was worth tens of thousands of pounds when I had everything up and running 20 years ago. And as I say, you can do the same on just a normal phone. But you do miss, like when I got this out and you start playing with the knobs on it and you realise you've got access to all the parameters, everything's in front of you straight away. There's something nice and tangible about having things that you can touch. And I think that's why modular synthesis has sort of taken such a sort of an exponential growth in the last couple of years, because it's just nice to play things. We sit and work on a computer all day, not necessarily the most fun thing to come home and do it all over again. So I really do like this old stuff, but it does take up a hell of a lot of room and it does require maintenance. This is broken, the DAC player is broken, so anything to do with tapes seems to break. And obviously the more pots and bits and bobs you have, the more crackles you can get, the more leads you've got, the more dodgy leads you have, the more white ground loops you can get. So progress is a wonderful thing, but I do miss the sort of the old studios. It's a weird thing. Well, if you enjoyed that, don't forget you can watch this episode again whenever you like on the Clubbing TV official YouTube channel on our From the Studio playlist. If you've got any questions about any of this, I'll see what I can do to answer them. Although I'm not promising I can answer how to fix a tape machine or a DAT player. And if you are into your synths and your drum machines and this and that, check out my Starsky Carr YouTube channel. I've got a nice review actually of the Juno 106 versus the Juno 2 and all the different sort of sounds you can get out of it. I've got loads of bits and bobs on the TD-3, but as I say, nothing about Fostex R8s or Akai S3000s or XRI Systems XR300 MTCs, but it's worth checking out anyway. So I'll see you in the next episode of From the Studio.